Are the Denver Broncos doomed despite their comeback win over the Chicago Bears in Week 4? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens. I'm one of the many NFL experts here on our network. We're free and available all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn jobs help to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free on LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're a 5-day-a-week NFL podcast here, bringing you the biggest stories throughout the league every single weekday, every single week. And we have a bunch to talk about after Sunday's action of Week 4. So there were plenty of wild and crazy games, a couple of blowouts here and there. But in the first part of the show, we're going to talk with Sayre Bedinger of Locked On Broncos about, despite the Broncos' comeback win against the Chicago Bears, are the Broncos doomed? What to make of this Denver Broncos season? We'll talk with Sayre in the first segment about that. Then we'll take a look at the Chicago Bears end of things from the other side of that with Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears, as we'll be diving into if it's already time for the Bears to throw in the towel on the 2023 season. It's been pretty rough for them so far. Then we'll move into a bit more positivity and talk with Louie DiBiase of Locked On Eagles. We'll get into if the Eagles are a team still at the top of the NFC as they're undefeated at 4-0. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Sayre Bedinger of Locked On Broncos. The Denver Broncos pull out a pretty miracle win, beating the Chicago Bears after being down 28-7, come back, score a bunch of unanswered points, win 31-28. Here to talk about the Broncos and if they're doomed, even though they did come back and win this game, is Sayre Bedinger, one of the hosts over at Locked On Broncos. And Sayre, I know it's been a very tough start to the year for the Broncos. Obviously, you want to win in this league, but I think there are expectations for Denver going into the season and over the first month of the year. It's a lot different than what people anticipated. This game first, how did Denver come back and pull out a win when everybody left this Broncos team for dead after that first half?
Well, many people may be surprised to find out that Russell Wilson, I feel like, was the major catalyst for it. I know a lot of people have been talking through the first 3 weeks of the season like, and there must be something going on with Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. But anybody who's paid a lick of attention knows that it's the Broncos defense that's really been the problem. Of course, you give up 70 points. It should be an obvious red flag, right, against the Miami Dolphins. But we've seen Russell Wilson, despite it all, I think he's played well pretty much all season. But this was a game where against Chicago, he really started to take the game over in the second half, which was surprising, I guess, given the fact that the offense, needed to come back from being, like you said, down 28-7. And they started off the second half by giving the ball pretty much right back to the Bears, getting themselves in a hole with penalties. And so it was Russell making throws, converting third downs, getting the ball into the red zone. And then once he did, making sure that the Broncos scored. They were 3 of 3 in the red zone in this game, I guess, including a first quarter touchdown. But it was started by Russ and the offense just kind of not giving up, but then the defense made plays when they needed to. So it was kind of encouraging to see that, given all that has transpired over the last 2 weeks or so for this Broncos team.
And I know that if this game didn't go the Broncos' way, Sayre, if the Broncos had just gone out there and, laid another egg and didn't come back and the Bears put it to them, I think there would have been a lot of conversations about, well, what's next? Is there a full-on rebuild? What do you do with Russell Wilson at that point? Does the fact that the Broncos came back and at least showed life in the second half of this game change that for you? Or do you still think that changes need to happen at some level, but maybe not I don't even know the word, maybe not as an extreme level that they could have happened if the Broncos had lost this one?
Yeah, I think they do still need to make some pretty dramatic changes. Like you said, I don't know exactly what that should be. Maybe starting with Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator. I don't know if a heart to heart needs to happen there, but between the Dolphins and the Bears, and the Broncos gave up almost 1,200 or maybe over, depending. I need to check the final stats. I think it was over 1,200 total yards between those two games. So yeah, 730 something against the Dolphins and then 470 something against the Bears. So you may be better at math than I am, Kevin, but that's really bad is what that equals out to in total right there. So it's just, I think you have to have some kind of heart to heart with him between the two games. You've given up 14 touchdowns in two games. I think the Broncos had like 19 or so touchdowns, or 20 something, like low 20s touchdowns all of last season. So to see them give up 17 or 14, whatever it is, they're still letting people score is what it feels like, Kevin. That's where I'm kind of at with it. So Vance Joseph is the big one that I think that domino that needs to fall. But really, if you look at it kind of objectively, or I know a lot of fans are just ticked off about losing and about being bad and getting boat raced by the Miami Dolphins. But man, Justin Simmons hasn't been healthy, but he should be back next week. Baron Browning, he's been on the PUP. He could be your team's best pass rusher. He's eligible to come back now after week 4. I think they could make another change, like throw Riley Moss, a 3rd-round pick, into the mix at corner. Damari Mathis just doesn't have it this season. So whatever he's got going on, throw Riley Moss out there and see what he can do. But you get Justin Simmons back. Hopefully soon you'll get Baron Browning back. A couple weeks later, you'll get Greg Dulcich back. Hopefully all in time for the Kansas City Chiefs, who the Broncos play in week 6 and week 8 coming up here. So I think a couple big changes could be made, but I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there, how upset Sean Payton is over the defense.
Yeah, and let's go back to the offense for a second, Sayre, because I think the wide receivers have been a topic of conversation for this Broncos team. Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton. Now, Sutton has 3 touchdowns, 20 catches, but Jerry Jeudy, I believe, just 11 catches on the year, no touchdowns. I know Philip Lindsay had some stuff to say on Twitter after this game, and Jerry Jeudy was not shy. He fired right back at him. What's kind of your assessment? Because there's no Tim Patrick again this season, a really brutal injury for him before the start of the season. What's kind of your assessment on the weapons that Russell Wilson has to throw to? As you mentioned, also tight end wise, there's been no Greg Dulcich for him as a security blanket.
Yeah, the tight end position has given them nothing without Dulcich in the lineup, which is no surprise, really, I guess, although maybe expect a little more from like Adam Troutman to do something out there, but he has really not done anything. Wide receivers, I've taken a big issue with this position. I really, before even the news about Tim Patrick going down for the year, kind of felt like the Broncos needed to make a couple maybe minor investments at that position, maybe go after some late round guys in the draft, like we're seeing Puka Nacua for, the Rams, and just taking dart throws like that on day 3 receivers. Not every guy is going to be like that, but shoot, they just haven't drafted very many skill guys. So it was great to see them go after Marvin Mims, who's been really nice, but he's also getting very limited snaps. And I think for me, Jerry Jeudy should be that top guy in the offense right now in the passing game for sure. He should be the one that they filter everything through because he's their best guy after the catch. I think he's kind of their most dynamic in space. You've got his ability to work underneath and Marvin Mims, his ability to blow the top off. It's just Courtland Sutton hasn't quite developed into that wide receiver 1 that we kind of all saw back in 2019 when, Joe Flacco and Brandon Allen and Drew Lock were throwing the passes and he made the Pro Bowl. He hasn't been able to regain that form since tearing his ACL. Now, he's not slow or anything like that. He just hasn't been that same type of alpha guy at the receiver position. So he's a nice player, very solid, good team leader, high character, but is he a go-to guy? And I think that's what maybe this offense is really lacking right now. And maybe they have it in Jerry Jeudy.
And with the Broncos there, you bring in Sean Payton, you trade assets for him. You trade a bunch for Russell Wilson. If the Broncos were to enter this full-time rebuild, which I don't even know how realistic it would be because you also have to determine what you would do with Patrick Surtain and some of these other star players. I think the Broncos have the talent level to be really good. There's just something that's been holding them back for the past couple of seasons, whether you want to call it a rust decline or you want to call it the lack of chemistry between players. What do you think has to get better for Denver in order for them to live up to the potential that some people still think they have?
Yeah, I think it starts with kind of learning how to win, right? A lot of the guys on this team have been part of losing in the NFL and a lot of losing. So now you've got to, as the players, figure out a way to shift that culture around. And I know the Broncos brought in people who have won a lot, specifically like you mentioned, Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. Those guys have won a lot. So I think you get guys like that in who know how to win games, and you let them kind of hopefully dictate the culture. But those guys out there on the field, they've got to be the first ones to do it. I mean, you could point to any number of issues with the team defensively, penalties, self-inflicted wounds, like through the years that have just been really, and it's not even just, within the penalties category. It's not even just, well, they commit a lot of penalties. It's, well, these penalties are really poorly timed, like on 3rd and 1, multiple occasions against the Bears. You have false start penalties that push you back to 3rd and 6. And those types of things just cannot happen if you're a winning team. And I think you can see when a team passes the eye test, they look like a good team. The Broncos haven't been that for most of this year. But like you said, they have the people in the building that I think could come through, make some plays. I think they have the coach. I think they have the quarterback. It's just a matter of, can they all put it all together? I don't know. And I don't know what that means for the team's future beyond the season.
We'll see what happens over there in Denver. I don't know what they're going to do, but hopefully, at least for Broncos fans, it's been rough for them. Hopefully they won a couple more games over there and everything will come into place. But for more on the Broncos and Sayre's work, check them out over at the Locked On Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, I'll be talking with Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears about the Bears' perspective of that crazy comeback coming from the Broncos and what it means from Chicago's side of things. So if you're to stay tuned, plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And these days, every potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs to find the right people for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of success over on LinkedIn, finding jobs for people I know. And it's really easy to create a free job post over on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job in the profile hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools you can use, like screening questions, to make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experiences to quickly prioritize who would like to interview and who would like to hire. And it's really important to both start and end the year strong, and the right team member might help you do that. That's why small businesses are rating Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to fast. Post your job for free. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Some changes apply. We're back here. It's our second segment of Locked On NFL here on Monday, coming to you after Sunday's Week 4 action. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you talking football. Let's talk about the Bears now. We talked about the Broncos side of that crazy comeback, but Chicago was unfortunately on the other end of that. Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears has it all for us about if it's already time for the Chicago Bears to throw in the towel. We'll talk about that now. Well, the Chicago Bears are just, I don't even know the words. Dumpster fire comes to mind as they blow a huge lead to the Denver Broncos of all teams, losing 31-28. And we have Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears here to talk. And if you see on the YouTube, Lorin's putting on the paper bag. It's time to bring out the paper bags. And we're talking about if it's ready for the Bears. If it's time for the Bears to throw in the towel at this point. Lorin, I know this was just another game where I didn't think it was Chicago's year this year, but at least I expected a little more from them to start the season. They've now lost 13 straight games since trading away Roquan Smith, I believe 14 straight overall. How did Chicago manage to just throw this game away in a game they were up 28-7 in?
Yeah, I suppose paper bag's not great for the audio audience, so I'll take it off. But that's the feeling, right? The feeling is a permanent paper bag attached over your head. How they blew a 28-7 lead. Well, some of it was taking the foot off the gas a little bit. You know, they Justin Fields was 16 of 16 passing to start this game and still finished with career highs in completion percentage, yards, and touchdowns. He overall had a great game despite a late interception and a late fumble towards the end, but probably shouldn't have been put in the position to have to try and come back and throw the interception. But regardless, you know, they started running quite a bit more in the second half, trying to control the clock a little bit, and they were running decently well, but, you know, a penalty here, a penalty there, a miscue here or there in the blocking, and a sack, you know, in there, and things start to go backwards. You stop scoring. You don't feel that momentum, that confidence, that aggression offensively. So all of a sudden the Denver Broncos defense starts to look less than historically awful. I mean, this is the team that gave up 70 to the Dolphins, and the Bears started having trouble scoring on them in the second half. It already felt like you could feel the rumbles here. And really, this game turned, funny enough, there was a moment in the game when Sean Payton had his assistant coaches actually cut his long sleeves with scissors to be about a 3/4 length sleeve, because I guess he was getting too warm. And the Bears did not score a single point after that point in the game. It was all Broncos from there. So that really is what did it for them. But defensively, it was just too easy for Russell Wilson at that point. It seemed like, again, the Bears also took the foot off the gas a little bit there. They stopped blitzing him quite as much as they did in the first half. They're not really a heavy blitzing team anyway. Things were a little bit too predictable on the back end. They couldn't stop the running back. The Javonte Williams got hurt, but McLaughlin, their backup, is just a speedster who was gashing this defense on the ground. And then Russell Wilson hit some play action off of that, and it was just everything fell apart. And we were reminded, too, that, hey, this Bears defense is pretty bad, too. The Broncos don't hold there's some real contender here for worst defense in the NFL.
And I know if there's any silver lining in this for Chicago, Lorin, is the fact that they now, at least for the time being, hold the number 1 and number 2 overall picks in the 2024 draft. But it does raise the question of, the Bears right now, they're 0-4. I don't think, again, a lot of people are expecting them to go and win a Super Bowl this season. But do you think that it's time for them to already throw in the towel, maybe a coaching change mid-season? I mean, what is the future for the rest of this Bears team in 2023?
Yeah, the Chicago Bears have never in their history of their franchise fired a head coach mid-season. But if there's ever a time to do it, it was after this kind of a loss. When you have a historic franchise record-setting start from your quarterback in this game, and a career best game as well for him in this game against a historically bad Denver Broncos defense, it makes for a historic collapse. And that would be a good time for a historic firing in terms of the team's history. You know what I mean? It's just like, to me, firing the coaching staff or firing the head coach here is not about, okay, we're going to fire him and then all of a sudden we're going to get better and try and turn things around this season. You fire him because it's accountability. It's ownership and the front office saying what we're seeing on the field is not acceptable. And we're going to show the fan base that this is not acceptable. And here's how we hold accountable when things are not acceptable on the field. I don't think it's going to be the case. They have 4 days before they play the Commanders on Thursday. That's not a good time to fire a head coach. Not that there's ever a good time to fire a head coach, but like the worst time to fire a head coach is when you got 4 days to turn around and play another game. Maybe after that, you got an extended, 10 days before your next game, or bye week is not till week 13. So we're talking December, first week in December. You let Matt Eberflus go the whole time, or this Bears regime, this Bears ownership has sit and watched Mark Trestman, let him finish out a whole terrible season. John Fox got to finish out a whole terrible season. Matt Nagy. They've been willing to sit there and take it. Well, their team is awful, and they let the head coach be on the sideline the entire season. So I'm not, at this point, I can't say that I'm expecting them to fire him midseason because they've literally never done it before. But I guess I'm hopeful that they could, but I can't say I'm expecting it because they just never have. So then it's a matter of seeing what your young players are from here and see who belongs. It's an audition for the next head coach. If you're a young player on this team, do you belong for the next regime, or are you going to be replaced next offseason?
And whether it is, the Chase Claypool drama or the on-field product, some of the other stuff going on for Chicago right now, Lorin, do you at least feel like at the end of the year you'll be able to take away a couple of positive things from this team? Like, is there anything that you're at least hopeful for that you can see for the remainder of the year?
I will say, part of the question with the general manager as to whether or not he should keep his job or not is that he's done decently well in the draft. Like, a lot of his picks in the first 2 years here, aside from Velus Jones, really have been at worst, encouraging, right? They've got a bunch of young players in the secondary that are learning and growing along the way. And there've been mistakes, certainly, but you're seeing these guys develop and make some progress there. And certainly, a guy like Darnell Wright at right tackle on the offensive line, you're trying to see progress from him. And they got a couple young defensive tackles they drafted this year. You can find some positives in some of these young players trying to make progress throughout the course of the year specifically, and hope that some of those guys can turn into, foundational pieces for your team for the next head coach to build off of that and use. The Bears have another $100 million in cap space this upcoming season, plus maybe the top 2 picks in the draft, or two picks in the top 5 at the very least. And, a new head coach can bring some energy with some resources, although that's what Matt Eberflus was supposed to do too. So we're kind of back to where we've been.
Major shout out to Lorin for providing the Bears insight. I know, again, it's been really rough over there for Bears fans. So for more on Lorin's work, check him out over at the Locked On Bears podcast, Paper Bag It All, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk with Louie DiBiase of Locked On Eagles about the Eagles' undefeated start yet again. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Let's snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So maybe for the Bears game, I don't know if you bet the over in points, the under in points, but it was a pretty high scoring game overall over there. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We are back, Locked On NFL Monday edition. Kevin Ostreicher still riding with you here as we're going to be diving into more NFL content. We talked Broncos, we talked Bears. Let's talk about the Eagles now. With Louie DiBiase of Locked On Eagles, as the Eagles are off to an undefeated start. We'll get Louie's opinion now on what it means for the Eagles and what it means for their Super Bowl chances in getting back there. The Philadelphia Eagles 4-0 for the second straight season after win over the Washington Commanders in week 4. A little bit of a heart racer for Eagles fans, but they get the job done. Here to talk about that with me is Louie DiBiase, one of the hosts of Locked On Eagles. And Louie, I don't think there was any doubt that the Eagles are going to be a good team this year. Now, they did lose a little bit on defense, obviously both coordinators too, but this is a 4-0 football team. They have earned that, but how'd they earn this win in week 4 against the Commanders?
Yeah, it was an up and down game. It was a good representation of what the season has been. It's been more adversity, I'd say, than 2022, but this team is battle tested and they find a way to win. And that's exactly what happened today. The secondary got roasted by Sam Howell, plainly put. They were terrible, and they needed their quarterback to win in a shootout. But Jalen Hurts, I think for the first time this year, really looked like his 2022 MVP form, where the ball placement was on another level. The clutch passes he made in the fourth quarter and overtime, the game, which should have been the game-winning touchdown to A.J. Brown, and then to set up the field goal in OT. Truly clutch ability from your franchise quarterback. That's what you pay him over $200 million to do. So they won because of their quarterback today. And not to say they haven't won because of Jalen so far this year, but this was by far his best game of the season.
And I think we're talking about this Eagles team. Defensively, it was going to be key for them to get off to a fast start. I know, the Commanders have been better on offense than I thought they were going to be this year. But what did you see from this Eagles defense in this game that I know, again, it came down to the wire for them?
Yeah, I think the pass rush actually was pretty good. For the 4-man rush, they weren't really sending a lot of blitzes. Sam Howell was getting the ball off, and it felt like under 2 seconds every single snap. They did have, though, 5 players that had at least 6 pressures in this game. The linebackers were good, too. Nicholas Morrow, 3 sacks in this football game. The secondary was where the issues were. Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jayon Dotson, that's a really good trio. And they made Darius Slay and James Bradbury look brutal today. And it wasn't just them, it's Josh Jobe, their third corner that's replaced Avonte Maddox. They're in some trouble right now. Teams are picking on him week in and week out, and I think that was the weak link today. So I think the secondary was a problem, and their defensive coordinator, Sean Desai, I'm not sure what he was doing late in the game with these soft coverages in money situations like third and short. He's having these corners line 10 yards off the ball. Some head-scratching decisions, I think, from the coaching staff and the secondary today, and that's why it ended up being a shootout. But I think the first 2 levels of the defense looked good as they have all year. The secondary right now, there's definitely some question marks, and that's something that was not the case in 2022.
And going back to offense, I know there have been some questions about the Eagles running back usage this year and how they distributed touches throughout their guys. Obviously, DeAndre Swift, a non-factor in week 1, and then comes back. He apparently now is the Eagles' #1 running back. Kenneth Gainwell, I know, had a role, then was injured, then came back and still has a decent role. But Rashad Penny was signed in the offseason. He's pretty much been a zero. And then you have kind of Boston Scott filtering in at some point. So have you kind of agreed with what the Eagles have done with the running back rotation so far?
I think DeAndre Swift has shown the last 3 weeks that he is by far the superior talent in this backfield, and he should be getting, to me, 75 to 80% of the touches. However, the Eagles do like to rotate their running backs. I think Kenneth Gainwell has been a little too involved for me these last 2 weeks. Last week, he only had 2 less carries than Swift, despite the efficiency being completely on another level for DeAndre. And then this week, I think it was definitely more Swift. Each week, he's becoming the featured back more and more. But there's an instance where in 3rd and 11 in the red zone, where they're trailing in this game in the second half, they're running a draw play to Kenneth Gainwell. So there is still some overusage with who he is as a running back. I think he needs to be that second or third guy in this rotation. He is, but it's still the percentage of touches, the split between him and Swift. I want to see it definitely become way heavier in DeAndre's favor. So I think each week it's becoming more and more Swift's backfield, but they still really haven't fully commit to him the way that I feel like they did Miles Sanders last year.
Yeah, and I think Sanders, you got the pretty full workhorse. I mean, he was only getting 12, 14 carries a game, but I know that DeAndre Swift, they bring him in with Sanders going to Carolina. It's been a pretty solid fit so far overall. But Louie, I know we've talked about it a bit off air too, but the NFC has been a lot better than I personally anticipated this year. I know all the talk about the AFC having 12 to 14 playoff teams. The NFC, I mean, teams like the Cardinals are actually playing well despite all the stuff they've been going through. Well is a relative term, but regardless, I think you have teams in the NFC that obviously the Eagles are the team to beat coming off the Super Bowl appearance, but the 49ers have looked great again. Dallas, despite losing Trevon Diggs, that defense is playing well. Do you still see the Eagles is that team to beat, top team in the NFC, or do you feel like there are a couple more teams that could compete on that level with them?
Yeah, I think they're still, until proven otherwise, and they're one of the few undefeated teams left in the NFL. They still have, to me, the most talented roster, top to bottom, one of the top 3, top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, depending on who you ask. I still think they should be the top of the NFC until San Francisco beats them in the playoffs. They're the top team, but I think you're 100% spot on. The conference is way deeper than I thought. I thought this was going to be the AFC with so many good young quarterbacks in that conference. It was the Eagles and San Francisco and then maybe Dallas sprinkled in, but their big competition was going to be the teams in the AFC. But you look at how good Seattle's been this year, Detroit, Green Bay's been scrappy. The team they played today, Washington, the Commanders with Sam Howell are actually a pretty competitive team with a pretty talented roster on both sides of the ball. They have great weapons, a good defensive line. They're going to compete in the playoffs. I will say though, for the actual crown of the NFC, who's going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl, none of those teams still, scream championship contender to me outside of San Francisco. And as you mentioned, the Trevon Diggs injury, before that, I would say Dallas was in that conversation. But the way Diggs is out now and the way Dak Prescott has looked, I think it's still the Eagles and the 49ers, and there's a pretty significant drop-off. But again, with that middle tier, there's way more teams in there that are competitive that I didn't think were going to be. And I think you look at the NFC South, for instance, all those teams, like Tampa Bay's 3-1. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. So, yeah, I agree. It's definitely deeper, but the Eagles are the top team still.
Yeah, the Baker Mayfield resurgence is real.
Yeah,
over there in
exactly.
Tampa right now.
Who thought Baker Mayfield and Sam Howell were going to be leading teams that are 500 or more? So.
No, it's unreal. But in order for them to keep this up, Louie, what do they have to continue doing and what's working well for them right now?
Yeah, I think what's working well is kind of their bread and butter, the trenches. Their offensive and defensive lines have been some of the best in the NFL. The run game is still elite. They can be the best run team whenever they decide to be. The passing game finally is getting going, though. That's the thing, is if they're going to be the championship contender they were last year, because they can win games. They can make the playoffs every year, being a run-heavy Tennessee Titans, your former Baltimore Ravens type of team. But to be a true championship contender, they need to win because of the passing game more. They won because of the passing game today. They won because of Jalen Hurts. So I think the passing game needs to be the thing they lean on more. And they have all the talent in the world to be that team, so there really are no excuses. It was great to see kind of the roof get blown off in that area today.
Louie does a great job over there on Locked On Eagles. If you want to go support him and his work, check him out over at Locked On Eagles, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, audio form, video form. We're here for you 5 days a week. So be sure to stay tuned for everything we have coming up this week. We'll see you right back here tomorrow with our Tuesday host here on Locked On NFL.